Hi, it's Bee with Craft and Gaily Dose. Thank you so much for joining me today. We are going to be making a really fun interactive card that's going to make a splash. Are you ready to see what it does? If you would like to make one too, we're going to dive right in. The stamp set that I'm using is called Sunny Splash. There are 8 rubber cling stamps, including these 4 really cute bathing suits, and then 4 sentiments to go along with them. And once you learn this mechanism, you can use this idea with other sets too. Let's take a look at the supplies for this card, and if you need any of them, there's a shopping link in the description box. Here are the pieces that we're going to be using today. The card base is Daffodil Delight cardstock, and it's in landscape orientation, so it's going to be 5.5 inches across, 8.5 inches in height, scored down the middle at 4.25 inches. Then we've got some pieces of Coastal Cabana cardstock. This one is 5 inches by 3.75 inches, and then this strip here is 5 inches by 1/2 inch. I've got 3 pieces of basic white cardstock. 2 of them have to be the same size. They are 4.75 inches across by 3.5 inches in height. One will be for the outside of the card and one for the inside. The last piece is for stamping a total of 3 bathing suits. So this piece doesn't have to be any particular size. It could be scraps that you have as long as they fit the images. Next are some strips. There are 3 of them, and each one is 1/2 inch across by 3 inches in height. All of these strips are longer than what we need, and they'll end up getting cut down, but it's easier to start out with a bigger piece. This is some of that in color baker's twine, and I'm using the Sweet Sorbet color. This is 14 inches. And then I'll need 3 of the small brads from the round and square brad set. They're not going to be seen, so it doesn't matter which color you're choosing. I almost forgot one more little piece that is just 1/4 inch across by 1.5 inches in height. You can cut this from cardstock, or you can use printer paper or any other thin paper. It's going to be hidden, so it doesn't matter what it looks like. To make the notch on the front of the card, I'll be using a retired 1/2 inch circle punch. If you have something similar, or maybe a small circle or oval die, you can have that ready, but if not, I'll show you another way to do it that doesn't require special tools. My ink colors are going to be Sweet Sorbet, Calypso Coral, Daffodil Delight, Coastal Cabana, and Pool Party. I love these colors together. I'll be doing some ink blending, and I'm using a blending brush for that, but you can also use a sponge dauber. For the sentiment, I'm using Memento Tuxedo Black ink. Now we're going to need some adhesive foam in order to raise that front panel from the surface of the card and give the mechanism room to move. Now you can use dimensional foam stickers, but I'm going to be using the foam adhesive strips and the foam adhesive sheets because they're an easier size and shape for what I need. I'll start by stamping out my bathing suits in Sweet Sorbet, Coastal Cabana, and Calypso Coral. Do this on the scrap piece that you're using, since these are going to get cut out. Now for the message panel on the inside, I'm stamping the last swimsuit design using Coastal Cabana ink, or you can choose a different color. I'm bringing up my silicone craft sheet so that we can do ink blending on that front panel. I'll start by using Coastal Cabana on the bottom third. I'm tapping my blending brush into the ink and then starting off the page before I start swirling on some color on the bottom edge. After I go about 1/3 of the way, I'll switch to Pool Party ink. I don't really need a separate brush for these 2 colors since they're so similar. I usually share a brush for colors within the same family. I'm just going back and forth in the different sections, blending in more ink until I'm happy with how it looks. When my color is a little bit more than halfway up, I'll switch over to another brush to use the Daffodil Delight. I moved my whole mat so that I don't accidentally brush into the areas that already have ink on the mat. And this is just a more comfortable angle for me to work from. And I'll leave a mostly white border in between the two areas. I'll clean off my mat and then put my panel back on so that I can stamp the sentiment using Memento Tuxedo black ink. I'm centering the sentiment along the bottom inch or so of the panel. And now we can start to prepare all the pieces. First, I'll use my snips to cut out each of the swimsuit images. I'll start with a rough cut and then come in for more detail, and I'm leaving just a small white border around each one. I've got my trimmer out and I'm going to be preparing this panel for the front of the card. So first I'm going to turn it clockwise so that now this bottom edge is going to be over here on the left, and I'll place it at 1 3/4 of an inch. Now I've got 2 cuts to make at this position, and I'm paying attention to the measurements that are over here on the side of my guide. There's a little notch on the side of my trimmer blade, and I'm going to line that up at first with the 1 inch position. I'm going to cut from approximately 1 inch to 1.5 inches. That would give me a 1/2 inch cut, but actually I want this to be just a little bit bigger because those paper strips that I'm putting in there are 1/2 inch, and we want there to be a little tiny bit of wiggle room. So I'm going to start out at 1 inch. I'm going to press down into my paper, and then I'm going to scoot ever so slightly upwards. So I'm actually starting at just a little bit before 1 inch, and then I'm going to go down to 1.5 inches, and once I know I'm there, I'm going to scoot down ever so slightly. So we've just cut from a little bit before 1 inch to a little bit after 1.5 inches. Now I'm going to lift this up, and now I'll move my blade over to 3.25 inches. So my notch is lining up with the 3.25 inch mark. I'm going to press down in my paper and then go up ever so slightly, and then come down to 3.75 of an inch, plus a tiny bit more. So I'm cutting from approximately a little bit before 3.25 to a little bit after 3.75. So here's what that looks like. Once I've done that, I'm going to put my paper back. Again, that bottom edge is over on the left, and this time I'm going to put it at 2 inches. Now I'm going to make a similar cut. I'm going to start at 2 1/8 of an inch. I know that measurement is a little bit different, but it's because we're trying to get to the center here. So 2 1/8 of an inch, press down and then go slightly up, and then come down to 2 5/8 of an inch, plus a tiny bit more. So now we have a cut that is centered horizontally between the 2 that we had previously made, and it's 1/4 of an inch higher. Next, I'm going to measure 1 inch from the bottom. So I'm just going to put this bottom edge along the center of my trimmer track there, and there's the 1-inch mark. I'm going to make a little dot so I know where that is. I'm going to make a finger notch right where that 1-inch mark is. Now for this, you can use any small circle die that you may have. I'm using a 1/2-inch punch that is unfortunately retired, but I'm going to show you in just a second how to do that if you don't have a die or a punch. So I'm just lining mine up, and I've created a little notch there. Now, if you don't have a small circle or oval die or punch that you can use, here's another option. So if I have this 1-inch mark here, I can bring it down to my paper, and now I'm going to mark 1/4 inch above and 1/4 inch below. These squares on the grid paper each represent 1/4 inch. Once I've marked those out, I can go along this 1-inch line and just estimate a point over here. It's almost 1/2 inch, but it doesn't really have to be exact at all. Now I'm marking mine with pen, but if your pen is not erasable like mine is, then you probably want to use pencil. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a little fishtail. I'm going to cut from this point to the point that's inset there, and then from this top point to that same area, and now I've created a little notch. Now we're going to work on our mechanism, starting with this piece. I need to make some measurements on here so that I can poke little holes. And so I'm going to put the edge of this against my trimmer track, the center of that, and then I'm going to be looking at these numbers here so that I can measure it out. I'm going to make a mark at 1/2 inch. Here's the 1/2 inch point. So I'm making a mark right here. It's centered vertically and at that 1/2 inch mark. The next one is going to be at 1 5/8. So here's 1 1/2. It's 2 little tick marks past that. So 1 5/8 is here. And then finally 2 3/4, which is right here. Now I just have a little scrap piece of styrofoam that I like to use, and I'm using a thumbtack, or you can also use the pointy end of your Take Your Pick tool. I'm just going to poke little holes where I have my marks. And then I've got these 3 strips here, and I'm going to poke a hole at the end of each one. I'm going in about 1/4 inch from the side edge and centering it vertically. Now don't stress if it's not exact, because it will still work out. I'm bringing in 3 of those small brads, and I'm going to connect these pieces together to make the mechanism. So I'm going to, it's going to go this way. I'm going to go ahead and put my brad through the Coastal Cabana piece. And then through the basic white piece. I'll open up the prongs in the back, but not too tight, because I want there to still be able to be movement. I'm just checking to see that these can all move okay. Okay, now this is really fun. We get to thread the mechanism through the slots in this piece. So I'm working here from the back, and I've got the long part of my strip over here on the left, I'm going to start putting these through the slots. And I'm not pushing in too far at first, because if you push the first one in really far, then it makes it harder to place the other ones. So I'm just putting in just a little bit, and then I'll do the middle one, and then the last one. And once you have them all started, then you can push them in further. And I'm going to keep pushing until this strip here is roughly centered over where my notch is. So it's going to look something like that. And then from the front, now let's just start to test it out. I'm going to go ahead and pull, and you can see what starts to happen. And we have an opposite action here. So when you pull to the right, the arms swing to the left, and vice versa. Okay, now right now you can see that this is kind of free to move any which way, which we don't really want for the final card. So that's where that extra little strip of printer paper comes in. So here it is. I'm going to go ahead and wrap it around this piece so that I can form a little collar. So I'm just going to fold in one side of it, and then once I have that folded, I'm going to scoot it over a little bit to give myself some wiggle room. So I don't want it too snug. I'm going to scoot it over a little bit, and then I will wrap the other side. So then it looks something like this. And I can test it and make sure that it's not too tight. I'll go ahead and take it off and put some glue here. And I'll press on that and really give it a good chance to set up. Once it's adhered, oops, it jumped on me. Once it's adhered, I'm just going to squeeze on it and make sure that there's an open area there and I haven't accidentally glued those sides together. Now I'm going to slip it back onto our pull strip. I like to do it so that the seam that I just created is now face down up against the card. And that just gives it a little bit extra security because now you're gluing over this seam, and that's just going to make it a little bit more secure. So I'm slipping it on, back on. And now I want to position my pull strip again. I want to make sure that it is centered over the notch so I can check on it from that side. And then I want this collar to be right past where the notch is. So let me show you. I'm going to put glue here. And then I'm going to go ahead and position this so that it's right close to that notch. The closer that I can get it, the more my pull strip is going to be able to move. So I'm checking on the front to make sure that I can't see the collar and that that pull strip is still centered in the notch. Okay, once this has set up, then I can test it again. That works great. And you can see that now that strip is going to stay in place and I can't just pull it randomly everywhere. Now I'm going to put foam on the back of this panel. I'm using a combination of the foam adhesive strips, which are already pre-cut for me, as well as some foam adhesive sheets that I have trimmed down. The foam here on the end is going to keep that pull strip from being able to be pushed in too far to where it peeks out the other side. Now you can get away with just a single layer of foam, but I'm using a double layer because that's going to allow the piece to move more freely And there's enough room so that the heads of those brads don't leave an impression on the paper. You can also do this with the dimensional foam stickers, and they are all the same height, so they're interchangeable, but it's just easier when you have bigger pieces. I'm using lots of foam here because I want this panel to have good structural support. It's always good to keep retesting. Now that my brads are in place, I can go ahead and trim off the ends so that they don't bump up into any of that foam. You don't want to cut them beforehand though, because then the ends would be blunt and it would be hard to thread them through those holes. Now these prongs are thin enough that I can cut them with spare scissors, but I'm not going to use my good snips. Or you can use something that's meant to cut wire or metal. Now those little metal pieces can fly, so take care to protect yourself, especially your eyes. I've got safety glasses on. Now before I take off the backings and put this onto my card, there's one extra little thing that I like to do. I'm dusting the surface with anti-static powder. It's the same stuff I use when I'm heat embossing. This way, if I wasn't too careful about stacking my layers of foam and there's stray adhesive somewhere, this will take care of it and prevent the mechanism from getting stuck. Okay, now I'm going to push my pull strip in as far as it will go, and I'll go ahead and trim it off. Now I'll pull it back out just a little bit, and I will go ahead and I'll punch a hole about 1/4 inch from the right edge and center it vertically. This time I'm going to use my Take Your Pick tool to widen it after I've gotten that hole started. Just going to press in further. And now here's my length of twine. I am folding it in half, and then I'm going to use the looped end and thread it through. If you have trouble with this, you can use your Take Your Pick tool again to sort of push it through until you can get enough to pull on it from the other side. And then once it's through, I can go ahead and tie it. I'm just putting all 4 strands together and tying a knot around my finger. I can use my tool one more time to place it in the knot and kind of hold it in place where I want it to be as I pull on the ends and tighten around it. Okay, now that's ready. Just neaten up the ends here, including cutting open that loop. I'm going to pull my tab so that now the swimsuits are in a neutral position. And remember the backing pieces from my foam adhesive sheet? I'm going to slip them underneath these white tabs here. It's just going to be a little extra protection as I put glue on these tabs. I'm going to add some glue. Then I'll take my first swimsuit and I'm going to position it so that the waist of the bathing suit is right along where that slit is. My tab is longer than what I need, and the glue has extended past the top of the bathing suit. So I'm not going to press all the way down. I just want this part down here to be adhered to the tab, and then I'm going to trim that off in just a second. Same thing, match the waist to the slit. Once the glue has dried, you can go ahead and test it. And now we can trim off the excess. Let's put the Coastal Cabana layer onto the card base, and I always like to flip it open to make sure that I've got it right side up. And now we'll put our panel on top. So go ahead and start to remove the backing layers. I like to just partially uncover the backing so that if I need to lift it up and adjust something, I can still do that. Once I'm happy with the placement, then I can finish peeling off the backing and really press it down. And now we just have to put that panel on the inside. There's our awesome finished card. Of course, we've got the bathing suit on the inside, and then the ones on the front are just so fun to play with. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you've enjoyed this dose of creativity. If you get a chance to make this project, I would love to see it, so share it in my Facebook group or tag me if you're sharing elsewhere. You can find all my links in the description box below. I hope to craft with you again next time, and until then, have a great day.